Hello, my name is Charlie Hank, and I'm a member of the Historical Committee. As part of the Historical Committee's effort to document the history of ASHRAE in preparation for the celebration of our centennial, we are interviewing presidential members of society. Today we're going to be interviewing Don Rich, who is president of ASHRAE in 1991 and 1992. Welcome, Don.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Don, if you would start off and give us a little background about yourself.
Yeah, sure. I'm a native of Rhode Island. I was born in Rhode Island, Providence, and my early years lived in Cranston, Rhode Island. Went to Cranston High School and later went to Brown University, which is in Providence. Took a course in engineering and graduated with an engineering degree from Brown in 1951. Decided following graduation that I really wanted to go into the technology a little bit deeper, and so I decided to go to graduate school, and I did my graduate studies at Harvard, which was, of course, up in Cambridge, and graduated from Harvard with a master's degree in '52.
Good. And then after you graduated with your master's degree, did you go out and start working right away?
Yes, and as a matter of fact, I began to do some interviewing when I was at Harvard, and a fellow from Carrier came to interview me at the university, and I decided that, gosh, I'd really sounded like a kind of a air conditioning, refrigeration that interested me, and I'd like to go into it. And, but I'd like to actually say why that appealed to me, because when I was at Brown, I worked during the summer for a company, and actually the same company my father worked for, which was called the American Moistening Company. The American Moistening Company was involved in textile humidification. You know, in textile mills, they have to maintain fairly high humidities in order to keep the threads from breaking in the textile processes. And when I worked there as a draftsman, and I noticed that they were using this chart called a psychrometric chart. And I got kind of interested in it, and my father would go out, and he was an engineer, and he'd use a sling psychrometer, you know, and then look up the relative humidity in this psychrometric chart. And I noticed that all the men at American Moistening Company were using psychrometric charts. And I got very interested in that whole field of temperature and humidity control. And of course, they were using a Carrier psychrometric chart. And so I said, gee whiz, any company that can develop a psychrometric chart must be a pretty good company to go to work for. So I was very interested and accepted Carrier's offer to go to work for them.
Wow, and you've been working with them ever since.
And I've been working for them ever since.
That's right.
And I have no regrets. It's certainly been a fine company to work for, and of course a great pioneer in the air conditioning field.
What were some of your projects that you worked on while you were at Carrier?
Well, let me start by saying that when I first started at Carrier, which was in 1952, Willis Carrier had only been dead for about a year. But you might as well have assumed that he was still alive, because everyone talked about Willis Carrier, and everybody talked about, they called him the chief. And it was almost like he was still alive, because they'd say, well, the chief would tell us this is how we would calculate this, or the chief would tell us this is how you design that. So it was really a very exciting period to begin work with a company that was really just on the verge of revolutionizing the industry in a really big way. But to answer your question, the first project that I got involved with, which probably had a lot to do with shaping my career, was a project to develop a rotary regenerator. And Carrier at that time had an interest in the possibilities of gas turbine propulsion. the carrier had purchased a plant from the General Electric Company in Syracuse, where during the war, they'd made jet engines. And so they had a facility where we were making centrifugal refrigeration machines and absorption refrigeration machines in those days, but it also had a capability for making gas turbine engines. And there were many at Carrier who thought there might be a future for gas turbine engines. So we had a contract with the Navy to develop a gas turbine, not for Carrier to develop, but Carrier only had the heat exchanger part of the engine.
Oh, I see.
So we had a contract to develop a rotary heat exchanger for this gas turbine propulsion system for this Navy boat, and it was a high-speed boat. And I got very fascinated with that technology. It turned out that the technology of heat transfer to a rotating type of heat exchanger was not a simple technical problem, and it sure wasn't a simple design problem either. So that was my first project. I have good memories of that project.
Well, that sounds nice. And what did you lead into after that?
Well, the contract was completed, but decision was made that we really didn't want to go further with that technology. It didn't really look as if there was enough of a business opportunity there for Carrier. And so the next exciting project that came right on the heels of that, and that I was thrown right into as a young engineer, was air conditioning for jet aircraft. The Boeing 707 was just being on the drawing boards, and the Douglas DC-8 was just on the drawing boards, and those were the first commercial jet aircraft. And Carrier was involved at that time in bidding on two proposals, one for the Boeing 707 and one for the Douglas DC-8. And I was on a team, as just a rookie green engineer, I was on a team to help write proposals for those air conditioning systems. And I'll tell you, that was very, very exciting. It turned out that Carrier was selected as the prime contractor on the DC-8. And we developed a vapor compression air conditioning system, a Freon 12, refrigerant 12 system for the DC-8 aircraft that was really revolutionary even by today's standards. The system employed us, first of all, the system was about 13 tons of refrigerating capacity. It employed a centrifugal compressor that was about that big.
Wow, it's relatively small.
13 tons. The impeller of the centrifugal was that big, and it had a rotational speed of 90,000 RPM.
Wow.
And I don't think, I'm not aware that anybody has ever built a machine like that since. So being involved in that development was very exciting, and Carrier built many of those systems for DC-8s. I'm not sure right now. I think all of the jet aircraft today use an air cycle system rather than a vapor cycle, Rankine cycle system. But that was certainly a very exciting experience as a young engineer going to work in the industry.
It does sound like it was very exciting and a challenging project for a young engineer.
Yeah, it really was.
Right.
Yeah.
Then as you continued on to another project after that for Carrier?
Yes, to give you again some perspective on how exciting the industry was, when I first went to work for Carrier, there was no such thing as a commercial lithium bromide water absorption machine. That was still in development. The first split system residential air conditioner was in the development laboratories. So all of these were, these kind of systems which we accept today as being the bread and butter of the industry were really just under development back in those days, which made it very exciting. The early experience with the rotary regenerator first, and then with developing these very advanced heat exchangers, had to be very lightweight and compact for the DC-8 jet aircraft, really got me hooked on heat transfer as a technology that I really was interested in and wanted to put my career into. And so the next things that happened was I had an opportunity, in fact, to head up a team that was beginning to develop Carrier's first truly fundamental research program in the area of heat transfer. We were a lot of young people. We formed, in 1958, they built a new building, which in fact is still there, and I still have my office in. And that was the Carrier's new research laboratories. And in those laboratories, we had the first research program and what I consider still to be the finest industrial research program in the industry. And I had the opportunity to develop the fundamental program in heat transfer.
Oh, fantastic. That's nice. I guess as the years went on, you looked into different tube configurations for various applications?
Yes, and they still are, and they're still revolutionizing that technology. Of course, we didn't have the computers at that time. I remember we did computations with slide rules. I was fascinated when the first, we did have a digital computer. In fact, back in the 50s, it was an IBM, and we had to write it in machine language, which you could hardly imagine. It was such a struggle to get much done. So you only did things that would have been, had to be very, very repetitive and require a lot of calculations to do it on a computer. We did a lot of experimental work, a lot of cut and try experimentation, trying to find better fin surfaces and better fin tube configurations that would improve the performance and lower the cost of heat exchangers. And when the digital computers finally really came into their own, then it was just a wonderful thing for those of us who worked in heat transfer, because we were able to develop computer codes for taking the data that we took in the laboratory, reducing the data, analyzing it, and then later building that information into computer programs that could simulate the performance of heat exchangers. And then ultimately computer programs that could simulate the performance of entire air conditioning systems. Some of my major contributions really, as I look back, were in this area of computer simulation.
Well, how did you get involved in ASHRAE from all this?
Well, you know, I think like many others, and you've heard it, I'm sure, from other presidents, somebody has to ask you. And I was very fortunate that I had people at Carrier who were active in ASHRAE. Of course, Willis Carrier was one of the presidents of the society. The man that hired me to come to work for Carrier was Bud Palmatier. He was a F. Paul Anderson Award winner with the society. And his boss and the vice president of engineering, or actually he was director of research and later vice president of engineering, was Walter Grant, and he was a president of ASHRAE. And Walter came and interviewed me at Harvard, and Bud came and interviewed me at Harvard. And the first thing they told me was, hey, you know, you come to work for Carrier, you got to go join either ASRE or ASHVE, one or the other. And Bud was an ASRE member, and he was a great guy, and so sure enough, I just went right without thinking twice about it, went off to my first ASRE meeting in Syracuse.
Interesting. So then, you were a member then when they merged.
Yes, yeah. As a matter of fact, Walter Grant, I think, was one of the presidents during that transition, during that merger of ASHVE and ASRE.
I believe during that time when they were merging, the officers served a 6-month term.
Yes, that's right.
Right.
And Walter served for 6 months. Another carrier man that he just died this year was Karl Lashley, and he was a president of ASRE. I think a couple of years before the merger, and he may have been the president of ASRE when I first got involved.
Interesting.
So there was certainly an awful lot of support for participation in the society by these what I consider giants in the field at the time.
And that's really what it takes to get young members involved, is to have somebody invite them, as you said.
There's no question about it.
Right.
No
To encourage
question
them.
about it.
Well, then, what committees did you start on in ASHRAE?
Well, another presidential member who happened to be my boss for a relatively short period of time was Stan Gilman. And Stan was a president of ASHRAE and very much involved. And Stan said to me, I'd written a report. And Stan said, you ought to write a paper on that. That's a good piece of work. So why don't you write an ASHRAE paper? So I did. And the paper was published, which pleased me very much. And I went to an ASHRAE meeting, and I was able to present it. And then a little later, Stan said, I need a chairman for a heat transfer committee that we are forming, and would you take the job? And I said, sure. And, of course, then I was off and running in terms of committee involvement with the society. So that's how it really got started, and that was back in the early 60s.
I'm sure you served on a number of technical committees.
Well, yes, I was... But my love was the heat transfer committee, and I served on that more years than they would allow today, and became chairman, and then later got involved in other technical committees. I got involved in the air to refrigerant heat exchanger committee, in a nomenclature committee, technical committee, computer applications technical committee. So I was on a number of them. But the heat transfer one was the one that I spent most of the time and energy on. And I guess as I look back, the thing that was so interesting in those days was that the Cleveland laboratory had been closed down in the early 60s, and the society was moving in the direction of sponsoring research at universities. And so one of the challenges that I had as chairman of this committee was to begin to build up a research program for the society at universities.
Oh, interesting.
And I've told people this before, but they're amused that I was actually involved with RP1 and RP3. And of course, I don't know, we're up to RP 200 and something now,
yes,
I guess.
Right. But, so you're involved in the first research proposal.
Yes, the ones that weren't done at the Cleveland laboratory.
Can you tell me anything about the Cleveland laboratory? Do you know much about it?
I never visited the Cleveland lab, but I know I went by it. I was shown this was where the lab was in Cleveland. It was a laboratory, of course, that did work on physiology and airflow and ducts and those sorts of topics of interest to ASHVE primarily. It was a difficult decision to make. I think that decision was made somewhere around 1958 or 9. It was shortly after the merger. I think that they made the decision that we really couldn't afford to continue to keep that laboratory going, and that we would move toward sponsoring research at universities. So RP1 was, I remember that one, as it was a project on condensing heat transfer. It was being done at Kansas State University. And RP3 was a project on heat transfer to coils that was being done at Case Institute.
Interesting. And you still remember all that?
Oh,
yes.
yes.
First ones?
Yeah, very clear.
Right.
Yeah.
And then after your TC committees, where did your interest go in ASHRAE? Did you start off at some other office along the way before you got into the chairs?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, indeed. As a matter of fact, the next step was involved in the Handbook Committee. And, of course, the handbook is extremely important to society, and I've always felt that I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to work on that committee because it's such an important thing to our members. I worked on the Fundamentals volume and was chairman of the Fundamentals subcommittee for the handbook. And I was slated to move up and become chairman of the Handbook Committee when I was given an opportunity to become chairman, or not become chairman, but become a member of the Research and Technical Committee. I also served on the Program Committee as well. That was very challenging. I guess I've always said this, and I truly mean it, that back in those days, the Research and Technical Committee was really the premier standing committee in the society. And when I had an opportunity to become a member of the Research and Technical Committee of ASHRAE, I really felt as if I'd arrived. It was all that I ever really aspired to in the society, was to be a member of the Research and Technical Committee.
I've also heard the same thing, that it was truly the committee to be on.
Oh, yes.
The direction of the society.
Yes. And, you know, I've since, of course, been on committees to nominate members of the Research and Technical Committee. You know, to be a member of the Research and Technical Committee, you have to be elected by the board. And it is just amazing the number of highly qualified, really outstanding candidates that we have for to fill the very few positions that we have available on the Research and Technical Committee. ASHRAE is really blessed to have such a pool of talent willing to serve the society.
So then from the R&T committee, where did you go?
After I left the R&T committee, there was a very interesting thing that happened in the society. It was decided to form what's called the Research Advisory Council. And the interesting thing about, and Bruno Morabito, who was also a Carrier man, was president of the society, and he felt that the society was ready to adopt a council structure. Now, I was not really aware at the time that I got appointed to be a member of this Research Advisory Council, that it was in fact an experiment in the council system. And but that's really what it was. And so the Research Advisory Council, it was called, was put in a position to sort of look into the entire area of research and make some recommendations in terms of long-term direction. And as a result of that, we developed, and I won't say it was the first society's research plan. In fact, there was an earlier research plan for the society. But it was the first research plan that was put together in a very structured way, and as a result of a lot of effort and discussion with the various technical committees and with R&T members and so forth, and we put together the framework of the first research plan. And we, in fact, instituted formalized research planning, institutionalized research planning in the society. So that was the next important opportunity that I had with society.
And from there?
Let's see. Before being, I did serve on the board as a director at Lodge. That was a very exciting period. I had a chance to participate with, I love the Research and Technical Committee. And of course, as the director at Lodge, I served on the Technology Council. which in a sense was really the successor to this Research Administrative Council.
I see.
The change being that now it was part of the structure of the society and was chaired by an officer. And at that time, the officer was Clint Phillips. Clint Phillips was the first chairman of the Technology Council.
I see.
And I served on that. So that was a very stimulating period. Just before I was elected as an officer of the Society, I had an opportunity to chair a committee called the Innovative Research Ideas Committee. And I only was able to serve 1 year, and then I was asked to become an officer. But the Innovative Research Ideas Committee began to take a look at ideas that might be much more far-reaching and more innovative and much more high-risk kind of ideas for the Society Research Program. There was a feeling that the Society Research Program may be becoming too conservative, and we needed to put some riskier stuff and more innovative stuff into the program. And that's something that I happen to still believe in, and when I became president of the Society, I told the Society that they ought to devote more of their funding to that type of work.
So after you were a vice president, and I'm assuming you were a treasurer,
yes,
president-elect, and through
yes,
president.
I served 1 year as vice president, and 1 year as treasurer, 1 year as president-elect, and 1 year as president.
So what was happening in the world, let's say, leading up to your term as president?
Well, there were a couple of things that were really interesting. Talk about change in the world. That was certainly a period. I recall when I was a vice president of the Society, and we had an executive committee meeting. Lou Flagg was president at the time, and we had an executive committee meeting in Phoenix. And I remember we were watching the happenings in Tiananmen Square in China, in Beijing, on television. And this, of course, was a momentous time in history. Then when I was president-elect, I remember going to the New York meeting, and the Iraqi war had just started. And I remember we sat in the presidential suite with the television on 24 hours a day and watching the rockets on television, as I'm sure all the rest of us did during that period. It was actually a very frightening period. Many of us, when we went to New York, were concerned that there might be terrorist threats, and there was some concern as to whether the meeting was going to run into any kind of problems because of that.
So there may be some thought of even canceling the meeting, possibly?
I don't know to what extent that was seriously considered, but there was a lot of concern that there wouldn't be the attendance at the meeting, because many people were concerned about flying into New York at that time.
Right. I can understand that.
Yeah. So, and in fact, I heard that the attendance at the show was down some, at the exposition was down some that year, but we never knew if that was New York that people didn't want to go to, or the war situation, and it was never quite clear.
So your year as president, what was your theme for that year?
My theme as president was quality, our ongoing challenge. I picked that theme because I felt that that manufacturers had become aware several years earlier that to survive in today's global economy, that they better pay a lot of attention to quality of their products. I had a feeling that this quality initiative, which was real and was gaining momentum within the country and within the world, needed a little more visibility to the ASHRAE membership. Those of us who were in manufacturing were becoming very aware of it, but I think some in some of the other aspects of the, the society's activities weren't quite as acutely aware of it as those of us who were in manufacturing. Mm-hmm. And the movement toward total quality management was beginning to gain momentum. The term total quality management was not really well known at the time that I was president-elect and was formulating my theme. Mm-hmm. The Malcolm Baldrige Award had just been created, and companies were beginning to try to evaluate themselves according to the criteria of the Malcolm Baldrige Award. So I thought that it was a very timely theme for the society.
It sounds like it was. Now, how did you tie your theme in to the Presidential Award of Excellence?
Well, one of the important criteria of quality is to have good feedback from your customers. And so it seemed to me that the members of the society are, in a way, the customers of the leadership of the society.
That's true.
And so I felt that it was very important to, number one, emphasize chapter programs, because I feel that chapter programs are probably the main reason why the average member participates in society, is to go to chapter meeting. And that if we had quality programs, that the people would continue to come and look forward to coming to chapter meetings. And so I emphasized a chapter program in my Presidential Award of Excellence. Secondly, in order to gauge whether or not you are a continuous improvement is another principle in the total quality management system, and continuous improvement has to be based on feedback from the customer. And if the customer is the member, then I felt that it was important that we get constant feedback from the member as to how well we're doing. And so I instituted a program, part of my PAOE was to give points to chapters that got that feedback on the quality of the programs that were being conducted at chapter meetings.
Oh, good. Very good. What else did you do during that year as president? What other initiatives did you take?
The presidency is a busy year.
Yes, I'm sure.
And a lot of the things you do, you have your predecessors to thank for, and they got them started, and you were able to finish them. Damon Gowan preceded me, and Damon took a great deal of interest in education, for which I give him a tremendous amount of credit. He put together an initiative at the executive committee level to take a look at what we ought to do to try to improve our educational program. And I was very fortunate to have succeeded Damon in being able to carry that initiative out. What we did is we had a restructuring of the society. We hired a director of education, and we restructured the society so that the society could focus on education and not dilute our educational initiatives with other types of things which, though important, were not directly related. So we had a reorganization of the staff, and we also had a reorganization of the society's committee structure in order to allow us to focus on education. That was one very important thing that we accomplished. The other was the development of our first long-range research plan. We had strategic plans, and they are very important documents. They provide guidance to the society. They give all of us, in both leadership and the membership, a feeling of what direction that we're going. But we didn't have a long-range plan, and so during my year's presidency, with the work of an awful lot of the society, people of great skill and wisdom, put together our first long-range research plan, and then we built our strategic plan from that long-range research plan, and we put the whole thing together in 1 year, and it was just an amazing accomplishment. We think maybe we tried to do it a little too fast, and we were talking about that today, that maybe we'll try to do it a little more a slower pace, but I consider that to have been an extremely important accomplishment for the society.
It really sounds like it's given us a direction for society to move into.
Yeah.
And like you say, you have to continually refine it as you go along. It's not a static plan.
That's exactly right. Yes, yes. Another thing that I did is I really became concerned under, I think it was Dave Butler was president, and he had a session on diversity. We heard a demographer talk about what the future held in terms of the diversity of the membership of the society. And I was very impressed with that because the demographer said, well, you know, I don't have any crystal ball. All I'm doing is just telling you exactly what's going to happen. I know it's going to happen based upon the statistics that I have to deal with now in terms of where we are today. And what we're going to see is a much more diverse society. We're going to see a lot more women that are going to be in the workforce. And if you expect to grow as a society and maintain your position of leadership, you're going to have to make yourself more attractive to women. And so I formed an ad hoc committee on women in ASHRAE, and that committee really did some great work to stimulate them, stimulate the interests of women in ASHRAE, and also to point out the leadership areas that we needed to give attention to. That ad hoc committee was reappointed by Dick Charles, and this year Neil Patterson reappointed. Actually, he discontinued the Women in ASHRAE committee, and he formed a diversity ad hoc committee and made me as chairman of it. So,
I see. Okay.
I've got to, as a matter of fact, in a short while, I'm going to chair my first meeting of that new ad hoc committee.
Now, it sounds like that since then you were president 91, 92, and now you're still involved in another committee. What else were you working on? I mean, you don't ever get out of ASHRAE, I don't think.
You sure don't.
What else are you involved with in ASHRAE right now?
Well, one of the standard progressions after you're president of the society is that you become a vice chairman of the nominating committee, and then and also a member of the long-range planning committee. So I served my first year after leaving office in those positions. This year, I chaired the nominating committee, and I'm vice chairman of the long-range planning committee, and I will be chairman of the long-range planning committee next year. Also, while I mentioned this diversity committee, I was on a couple of other kind of special assignments. One that was really very, very exciting. Dick Charles, when he was president, felt that it was very important, and I certainly agreed with him, to establish much closer relationships with some of our, with all of our chapters, in fact, that are overseas in the Far East. And so Dick and I went as a team and conducted workshops for the members of the India chapter, Singapore chapter, Malaysia chapter, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Hong Kong mentioned. So we covered all of those chapters in a whirlwind tour. We put on workshops, and I ended up in Taiwan. I was attending a conference there and gave a paper that helped to pay for the travel expense. So that was a very, very exciting activity following my year as president, and a very, very successful one, I might add.
It sounds like you were conducting almost like chapter regional conferences at each individual chapter.
Yes, that's
as you
right.
went around,
that's right. And we had wonderful turnout. Mm-hmm. Oh, we had great turnouts for these. They were great students.
Any other information you'd like to relate to us on your year as president?
Yeah, there is one thing I'd like to say. Another part of the concept of quality is you have to give a recognition for achievement. I think the society does a wonderful job in recognizing the achievements and contributions of its members. In fact, I think companies could learn a lot from the way in which volunteer organizations handle rewards and awards. You know, companies have a tendency to think, well, we pay their paycheck so we don't have to give them any other recognition. Volunteer organizations, they don't have a paycheck that they can hand out, so all they can provide is recognition, and so they've learned how to do it very well. Was able to institute at CARIA an awards program in the engineering organization, which is very similar to the kind of awards that ASHRAE does. But there was one other thing that I did, is I discovered that we hadn't done a good enough job in recognizing our own staff, the ASHRAE staff. So I've had some conversations with Frank Cote about that, and Frank certainly agreed, and Frank has put together a recognition program for the ASHRAE staff. And the last time I talked with Frank, he said it was extremely well accepted and that he found it to be a very worthwhile thing. It's motivated the people and made them feel good about working for the society.
Well, it certainly is a great staff in Atlanta. I mean, every time I call there, I get excellent response. They're always pleasant, so it's working, whatever you're doing.
Yes.
That's good. What kind of advice would you like to give to an individual who is just starting his or her engineering career?
Well, first of all, I would say, the first thing I'd say was certainly join a technical society. If you're in our industry, by all means join ASHRAE.
Right.
But join a technical society. I think it's just very important to not focus all of your attention on just the circle within of influence within and the networking within your company, but you've got to network with people outside your company. And societies, technical societies, provide a marvelous opportunity for that networking. It gives you an opportunity to get to know, in my case, it gave me an opportunity to get to know the leading researchers in my field outside of CARIA. The professor that was working on RP3 and RP1, and many professors that followed, of course. The people at other companies in the industry who were doing the same kind of work that I was doing. So I would say that the first thing that a person ought to do when he gets in the industry is to give some serious consideration to getting involved with a technical society. I
think you get more out of being a member of a technical society than you ever put into it.
Oh, absolutely.
In rewards you really don't know about. I mean, they're not,
that's absolutely true.
That's true. Would you like to have any closing comments and wrap up?
No, I don't think there's anything in particular that I would close with. I have no special words of wisdom. I'm sure that all of the other presidents have said many things that are well worth listening to. I enjoyed this very much. It's been a lot of fun to be able to sit and talk with you.
Well, thank you very much, Don. I appreciate you being here with me today.
Right. Thank you for the opportunity.